Nice. Happy Wednesday. So I think we're expecting around 100 people for this session. Very excited to kick off. We'll wait for everyone to join. Nice. I think we've got most people. Thank you everybody for joining us today. So welcome to the online session. Super excited to have you with us. I'm Ashley from Pleo. I look after our tech and integrations partnerships, and we integrate with a lot of accounting platforms, ERP tools, implementation partners, and other vendors within that finance piece. So we created this session really just to explore what are the key elements of successful international expansion? How do you know you're working with the right financial tech stack from compliance perspectives, growth perspectives, experience perspectives? And this session is aimed at, it's really targeting two audiences. So firstly, we're looking at businesses who are outgrowing their smaller accounting platforms. So typically moving north of kind of 250, 300 users. And then the second audience we're looking at is the current ERP users. So especially if you're using NetSuite at the moment as your ERP framework, really if you're looking to internationally expand over the next few years. So as we all know, it's a lot of configuration and challenges can arise within that. So international expansion brings a lot of opportunity. It also brings a lot of challenges. So this is really around having a panel who can discuss some real world examples, strategies for streamlining vendors, making sure you're not making it more complex than it needs to be. So super excited. We've got a great panel lineup. So we've got Marta Obrador. So she joined Pleo as Senior Director. She isn't here from Pleo from a commercial aspect. Marta actually has a rich career with roles in Apple, Salesforce, NextThink, and brings a lot of experience within that technical integration piece. So her portfolio includes leading a lot of high impact projects, including 2 major NetSuite implementations. Then we've got Jimmy from Staria. So working at Staria for over 5 years, now the Chief Experience Officer. Has worked within this team on a massive NetSuite implementations, has seen good, bad, the ugly, but also has worked with a lot of companies on global rollouts as well as migrations. Vinny, a lot of experience from Avalara, one of the biggest global e-invoice and tax compliance companies. And Philip, who's a CFO of Gatekeeper. So Philip has a very broad spectrum from risk management, corporate finance, to fintech, strategic planning. So really has a lot of knowledge around how you shouldn't have to worry about what tools you're using when you're running a finance division, and how to make sure what data-driven insights are they really looking at that finance level. So with that, I will stop talking and welcome our panel. So we will kick off with Marta. So as I said, there's a lot of challenges when it comes to implementing a new ERP. It's not an easy process. It's not a plug and play small accounting platform. And obviously an ERP isn't just finance. It's a very broad spectrum when it comes to building that in a business. So your background, you've got a lot of experience in larger organizations and NetSuite implementations, and you've scaled those over Europe. So could you just give us just some examples of what challenges you've seen and how you really liaised internally to make that project a success?
Yeah, very happy. I think it does feel like walking on a minefield when you start a project like this. Even if you have lots of experience and you know what you're doing, it can be very, very complex. So maybe I will start with a story, maybe not a good story, but a very impactful story for me. When I was at NextThink is a Swiss software company, multinational, and we were implementing NetSuite. So we had the best implementation partners we could afford. They were They are the top 5 implementation partner worldwide. So really well supported from that side. We had a healthy budget. We had a reasonable timeline. We were super excited. So I still remember the day when we went into the room to set up the legal entity structure in NetSuite. So as one of the steps you all will have to do when you implement NetSuite is set up the parent and child structure. We thought it was going to be easy. So we took the legal documents and we thought, okay, who owns what in the company? Let's just, do the same in the system. We did it. The implementation partner supported us, reviewed it, approved it, implemented, we tested it. We were all happy. After go live, first month end, first consolidation, the numbers didn't tie whatsoever. So we thought, well, let's see what's wrong. We understood from another implementation partner that we engaged at the time that is not as simple as that. When you set up your legal entity structure in the system, you do not have to follow what says in the legal documents. There is more to it. So we said, well, we're going to fix it, right? We can fix it now. It's just month 1. You can't. So once you have, started the month end and there is transactions in the system, is not as easy. So we looked at all possible solutions. We could have gone like a walk around it, but we wanted a clean, good start. So we decided to do the whole implementation again. So that was a massive learning for me. It had obviously cost impact, the whole team, frustrations, as you can imagine. So for me, the biggest learning there was, one, I don't care about the name of the implementation partner. What you should care about is the people that you are going to work with. So interview them as you are going to hire them. Ask for references for customers that actually have worked with this specific team, not this partner, but the team. And then invest in planning, right? Like have a very long planning, testing. We did testing, not enough. Test, over test would be my learning from that experience.
Amazing. And I think it's funny when you say that around, it doesn't matter what you can afford. Like it doesn't always, I think when you're in that situation and you're weighing up resource versus budget on any project, whether it's ERP or not, and it doesn't always make sense just to throw money at the problem. And I always find that, especially with implementation partners and projects that I work with on as well, it's like, it's really the partners that care. And yes, they have the experience, but they also have that invested time. And interesting you say about the testing as well, because what do you think the key problem with, obviously you had like the sandbox environment, the production piece, what do you think the key issue was around not having enough testing?
Yeah, so that's super. I love that question because it's actually about the end-to-end testing. So we tested everything, but we're going to test the first stream and then tomorrow the next stream and then the next stream. So we got a very big Google sheet of all the use cases, but we didn't test them end to end sequentially in the same test run. And that's what was our mistake. Because if you test individually the use cases, they all passed. Yeah. Is when you went all together that it failed. So it's investment in testing. So right now what I do, I fly everyone together in the same room for 2 weeks, locked in there, end-to-end testing. We are not doing, our normal job plus testing. We're focusing on testing for 2 weeks. So it's a different approach to it, which works better now.
So really prioritizing on that.
Yeah.
Nice. And I mean, Jimmy, so you and the Staria team, you spend every day with clients, trusted advisors, different vendors, different projects. Obviously, a lot of them are successful. 4 out of 5 projects will go as planned. We'll have enough testing. But when it does come to like that migration onto such a complex tool or framework, how do you really work with your customers to help them avoid the pitfalls and know what challenges are going to come up?
Yeah, first of all, I get shivers by hearing the story of Marta's experience, and I haven't been in such a situation. Hope not to get it. But for me, it's three main things. In most projects, and I would say almost all, the first is to have an aligned scope with the customer. The second, I would say, is have an experienced and knowledge partner, and trusted, but that's sort of built on the experience and knowledge. And the last one is to sort of have a customer engagement and time. And I'll get back on that, because that's always easy for us as a partner to say, but I would say that out of the failed projects, many of the times it is due to constraints of resourcing or timeline on the customer's end as well. So it's really important that it's a partnership, not a vendor selection or partner selection. So the aligned scope is is sometimes a bit tricky. You can get an RFP or you get a question in and so on. And we sometimes would want the customers to, even if you haven't signed the agreement, so on, when you've sort of decided on, we're pretty sure we're going to go with this one. If it's a vendor or a partner, then I would say that's usually when it's spent a lot of time on still doing the selection. I think it would be better to actually align with that partner. Are we seeing this the same way? And also allowing the partner to really put their views in front of you. You're connecting with the partner because they have the experience. So let them tell you what they would propose, and then let's discuss it. Let's be open about it. So the sort of alignment of what is the scope, first phase, second phase, and so on, of course, but also, I mean, I'm open to having a discussion. We have X set budget. Okay, because you basically have three things to look at in the project. You have budget, timeline, and scope or quality. So it's perfectly okay to say, we only have X amount of hours. What can you do in that? And let us help you to scope things out, and maybe, can you do this? Yes, we can, but it's going to be manual. We want to do it in the future in the system. Okay, let's focus on the other areas. So I think scoping it, and an aligned scoping is super important. The second part that I mentioned, experienced and knowledge partner. I mean, from our end, this has been a challenge. We have grown quite a lot in the Nordics and now in Europe as well. We try to have a high number of years of experience in our NetSuite consultants, but of course it's hard to maintain like 7-8 years of average experience in countries where NetSuite has been around for 5 years or 10 years. So that's been a challenge for us. One of the reasons that we have consultants in several different countries is the fact of being able to find and maintain that and keep that. But that's also a challenge in discussions with customers. If you have more experienced people, perhaps you need to take a bit higher rates. It's difficult so it's a discussion with the customer, but I really think, and from our end, for example, we work a lot with SaaS companies and tech companies. So there are modules, and now we're getting a bit technical perhaps, and there's a lot of people that don't know what NetSuite is, but there are modules that are seen as complex modules where you need sort of certifications like revenue recognition, multi-book, and a few others. I think it's important to really align with your partner. Have you because any partner should be able to say, yes, we've done an implementation of NetSuite. That's not really a high threshold, but what is your specific more detailed or higher requirements? And if that's revenue recognition, for example, well, that's what you should check with the partner. Have you done a lot of those type of implementations? Or if it's multi-book, have you done a lot of those? So I think that's a key thing. And we have, unfortunately, let's not be over optimistic. We have done a lot of rescue projects. And I think a big reason for that is that the market has grown quite fast. So some have not been able to keep up with the pace, and taken on projects that they perhaps shouldn't. And I think we're quite good at actually saying no to the customers, and that's maybe unusual. But I think if it's not a good fit, or maybe NetSuite is a good fit for 80% of the things, let's not try to do the other 20%. Let's find partners instead, or even it can be outside of NetSuite if that makes sense. So I don't think we should try to squeeze everything in. And then the last thing, as I said, customer engagement and time. This is sometimes difficult for us as a partner to say to the customer, but this is one of the biggest risks in any project I've ever been in, that the people we need in our project are subject matter experts, that they know the business very detailed. that's usually the people that's needed also to keep the lights on, so and drive the business forward. So we do know when we come in with a project, we're going to add work to people that are already working quite hard. So we do try to challenge the customer. How have you secured that these 4 or 5 people will not have the same workload internally for the next 3? And there's different areas in the project or timelines, like UAT you mentioned, Marta, that's very often a way to squeeze part, because when you come there, you're having your go live date and so on. You don't get the 2-3 weeks that you might want. You get 1 week, and you should cram it all in, because and as a partner, we're selling consultancy hours. We can always find one more person and so on. The customer can't. So that's a big thing that we're trying to align with our customers as well.
And that's why when I look at Marta's calendar, I can never get time with her, because it's always making sure it's a focus. And she's always too busy on the project management. Do you think, Jimmy, there's any correlation, like you saying, around, obviously it is, and Marta, you covered, it is obviously an additional role. It isn't just a business as usual project by any means, where with the amount of money resource that's on there. Do you find, Jimmy, the size of the business dependent, but do typically most end users that you work with, companies that you work with, have a project manager owning and running it, or is it a team trying to build and go with the flow, or does it really vary?
So when we start discussion, we may not have, but I would say that we more or less require it from the customer. I mean, in a statement of work and a project plan, I would say that the project plan is just as much. In a negotiation, you're always trying to find, like, what's your response, but the actual truth of a project is it's a shared responsibility, even though we are driving it. So we always need a project manager from the customer. However, in most cases, that project manager is also the financial controller, or so they have I would say only the big projects, I would say that they have, and larger projects in general, or larger customers, is the only time we would have a let's say that their work is project management only. Usually project management is the role that they're taking on, but their actual role is the financial controller, head of whatever the role may be. But we also have some cases where the customer brings in either externally, or they have they always have projects, so they have someone that is defined as a pure project manager. And we actually, if they don't have it, and they don't really have anyone that they feel is suited or have the time, we do have partners that is not connected to Staria, but that we worked with before, that we would actually recommend them to have, because they need to follow the actions internally on a weekly basis, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I've run a few internal projects, and I know what it's like as soon as you lose that project manager. And like you say, you can't just throw money at things. You need that expectations laid out at the beginning. And I think that's a nice segue into kind of with like the people that obviously on this panel as well, obviously from Pleo, Gatekeeper, Avalara, even though we each niche in our own areas. But I mean, NetSuite as an ERP does so many different functions over a whole business. It's not just that finance piece. So I think the piece you said around making sure and really drilling into what those certifications are, and making sure that partner has that experience in the accreditation that you specifically need for your project is really good advice. From the trusted partner side, obviously, Staria, you work with a lot of different vendors that integrate with ERPs and accounting platforms. How do you define, like, at what point you then bring in or recommend those trusted vendors to the end user?
Yeah, so first, there are a few parts where we would typically, in almost any implementation, see that we need partners. I mean, typically you would have and it still can be a suite app, or it can even be built in NetSuite. But typically, for example, AP scanning and those kind of things, OCR and the whole AP flow would be partially from partners. Expenses would typically be from partners as well. So there are a few areas, integration to banks, etc. So a few areas is like a given that will be a partner, and we of course have suggestions on that are strategic partners for us. We know if someone asks us, we want this, we have one or two partners there, but we don't always decide that at the start of the project, because in the project we will present, for example, when it comes to vendor invoices, we will present the partner that we have selected to work with, but there are plus and minus for every vendor. So if the customer wants something else, we can adopt to that. So we have a set of partners that we work with in more or less every case, and then we have another set of partners that when we come to those kind of questions, we know that they are the ones to connect with. So some of it we implement ourselves. We implement a partner solution. Some of it we bring in the partner to discuss it and then see what makes sense from it. And then there's also areas, to be honest, where we sort of understand the gap a bit later on, or we understand the complexity of what they need and so on. And at that point, we would introduce whatever solution we have. And it's not always that we are the one neither selling it or implementing it. In many cases, actually, we just have a good partner, let's say, network, and connect them with the correct ones. But then we need to make sure, of course, that it was successful and so on. So looking at this meeting, for example, we worked a bit differently with Avalara and Gateway, and in terms of, with one, we have connected the customers. It's always been good at the end. So okay, good, but we really don't know the details of how it was done. We just know it's been done. And that's Gatekeeper. And with Avalara, we bring them in to talk, and we don't perhaps understand all the details of the tax discussions that we're having with the customer, but we know that they do, and they can provide it. So it's a bit different on how we work with different partners.
Yeah, and like you say, you don't need to know all of the ins and outs. That's why you pay and work with trusted people that know their niche, right?
And one thing to add there is, of course, that, I mean, if a customer has a system today, an ERP or several, and they're now going over to NetSuite, if they have a solution that they're today very happy with, then it perhaps doesn't make sense to change that and then change 200 approvers within the company to adopt another solution. So if the current solution they're using works well, they're super happy, then I would say in most cases integration to that system would be an option, and so with, for example, CRM, then, since no one here has CRM, then I can talk on that. But CRM, for example, I mean, we might have our preferences, NetSuite being the first, but other systems being second. But if we've already integrated to your CRM 5 times, why would we ask your sales department to change the CRM system if we can integrate to it? So it's keeping to the core and then offering the addition when it makes sense.
Yeah. Super random, going off piste. Have you ever, because I've never actually asked this, but have you ever had a customer who insists on using a vendor that you've had a bad experience with, obviously not naming any names, but that you've had a bad experience with, but they've still, like in the past, but they've still insisted on using that vendor? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, but so yeah, I have, but not so much what that system does. I mean, if they are happy with it, it's probably covering their process. But I've had situations where they're introducing us to a vendor, and the last time because when we do integrations to a company that we haven't done it with before, it is a 3-way collaboration. I mean, we have to work with the other partner that we don't know, and the customer is the one that can put pressure on their partner, because it's not our vendor or our partner. And I've been in situations where last time we tried to work with those guys, they didn't pick up the phone, they didn't answer, or and I would be very honest with that, because I would put that on the customer. If you're comfortable, if you have because you can have a much better dialogue and cooperation with that partner than the last one. I mean, we could have ended up in the wrong project team so I would be open to that. Last time we did this, there was a challenge in the cooperation with them. So because this needs to be a red flag that we need to be aware of in the project. I never have had that, like, technically that wouldn't work type of, not to my recollection at least, that like you can't integrate to that solution. I don't think so, at least. But if I did, then I would need, because then I already know this project is not going to end up well if we're signing off. I'm pretty good at saying no to things. That's my biggest, when I'm in meetings with our sales reps and so on. I'm a bit advocate of either selling what we can deliver or deliver what we've sold. We shouldn't sell things and then try to figure out how we should deliver it. So if it sounds too complicated, we need to explain that to the customer. So
definitely, and again,
but it's probably going to come. You never know.
Don't jinx it. And it's like you say, it's all about everybody being very transparent and realistic on project outlines, frameworks, next steps, somebody managing it. So we have Philip. Philip, very excited to have you on the panel, because you're obviously killing two birds with one stone. You're a CFO, so you know what it's like to actually be on that end of managing a finance team. You shouldn't have to be worrying about the technology that you're using. You shouldn't have to be worrying about the tools. You should just have products that work in order for your team to be able to do their jobs. So you're also obviously at Gatekeeper. So Pleo worked with Gatekeeper. I've worked with your team for a while, and I've Lara worked with Gatekeeper, as a lot of our implementation partners do when it comes to that ERP piece. So how, from the vendor contract management side, obviously there's tons that go into that, from making sure everything's there from a regulatory standpoint, the compliance, like finance directors shouldn't have to be worrying that vendors are compliant and have all of that regulatory infrastructure. It should just be implemented into a tool. So how do you feel that companies can really streamline and manage those vendor relationships and compliance complexities as they're growing and the need becomes more for them?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. I think it's a great question. And I think, kind of coming from a background of, pure startups all the way to well-established companies, it's really identifying at what point in time do you really need to, scale or move to a new system. I think, as you bootstrap a company or you have a startup, Google Sheets solves everything. And so does, Google Calendars and so forth, right? So, I think it's identifying that point in time where it's time to move off of that. And I think one of the things where, firms struggle is how long can we get away with our current process versus moving to the next step. And I think kind of, piggybacking on what Martha and Jimmy is saying, it's really identifying when that time is to scale up, when should you move from a basic accounting system to an ERP system, what vendors you should use to integrate with those, and really kind of taking a holistic view. So, and again, it is a job on top of a job. So it's really making sure you have a dedicated team that has the resources, because you don't want to slow things down. You also want the implementation to go very well. So it's having the right budget, the right partners, and then taking a holistic view. So when it comes to, overall finance functions, it really has to do with the data. Where is all the data? How is the data, pulled into different systems? And I think having bifurcated processes is where, companies end up with issues, right? So having all my finance, AR, AP in an ERP system, but my contracts and legal documents in a different system, and they're not talking to each other. I think that's where you have a lot of problems. And I think, at the point where, you have, a large scope of documents, legal agreements, vendor agreements, contractor agreements, you need a place to actually have those, and then pull those into the ERP system so you can actually check, is the invoice I just received, does that actually match the contract? Am I in compliance with the contract in terms of deliverables? And one of the big things is taking a look at who you're actually dealing with, who you're actually working with. How do you monitor their credit? You're entrusting each one of these vendors with certain aspects of your data in your business. You want to make sure that you have visibility to understand who you're working with. And I just think having control and managing, the contracts themselves, but also what I see a lot is, and what costs companies a lot of money is has to do with the fact of missing auto renewal dates, right? Keeping on track of the auto renewal dates, ensuring that you're receiving the service that you're doing, and then tying that back to the invoices. So I think, as we come into kind of looking at Gatekeeper, with the NetSuite integration and so forth, it's really combining all the sources of data so you're not missing anything. And I think keeping something on the side in a spreadsheet or a Google Sheet is really where, companies end up having problems down the line and ends up costing money. So if you actually take a look at, the ROI on moving to a bigger system, the time, the effort, most times the ROI is positive.
Yeah. And like you say, you've worked in so many different companies from a size wise. What do you think was the most successful one? Like when you've been in a company that's running a project like this, who typically is the person who's managing or owning all of those different data points?
Yeah, so I kind of agree with what Jimmy's saying. It's usually a CFO or controller to kind of take a holistic view of the business, but then you have to rely on your team and your experts in terms of what's needed underneath, right? So what is needed on the AR AP side of things? What is needed on the HIRS side of things, and pull those guys in. But I really think having somebody that leads the team, has that holistic view, that 10,000 foot view of what you want to accomplish and what the end result should be.
Definitely. And again, it's the same with Avalara, right? So Avalara, trusted vendor. I think so many, every time I'm looking, and I mean, Pleo, obviously we don't specialize in e-invoicing or tax or any of the complex side of that, but I know every time I'm seeing there's new regulations, and I think it was like last year, it was all of the different countries mandating e-invoicing for VAT on taxable transactions. And again, you wouldn't expect like an implementation partner to remember all of that. So as like having that knowledge, and when a company's looking to grow and the partner brings you in, Vinny, like what are the key considerations that you think they need to be looking at from the tax and compliance side when they're expanding internationally?
It's a mouthful just to talk about these things, actually, isn't it? Yeah, that gives an idea. That gives an idea of the complexity that it can be, and also obviously the dire implications of not being compliant, because it's mandatory, right, whether we like it or not. I would suggest companies to, first of all, take a step back, so to speak. Don't even consider technology, because if you think about it, technology is an application of whatever concepts you have in place in the first place. So I would encourage companies to consider, do they have a fair understanding of the tax overall landscape that they are getting into? So to give you a practical example, which I'm sure will resonate with many people in the audience, we see, for instance, companies based in Europe willing to do business with the United States, and they may be very well acquainted with the way VAT works across Europe, where despite the multiplicity of countries and languages, you still have about 3 to 4, perhaps 5 different VAT rates across countries. So it's to an extent quite simple. And then when you first start doing business in the US, you are struck with 13,000 plus tax jurisdictions across the country, over 52 states in total. Some of them are exempt, by the way, don't charge you US sales tax at all. If you add to that the dynamic nature of this beast, that is, things like, changes in legislation that you are going to see over the year, a concept we don't have in Europe, which is tax holidays. So, for instance, imagine you're taking your kids to, the kids are about to start in school, and the government in some state, the tax authority in that state, decides to waive US sales tax on perhaps school uniforms, or stationery. Thumbs up. But then if you happen to sell these things, that may have, in this example, positive implications for your business. So needless to say, it is humanly impossible to keep abreast of all of those changes in real time manually. And that's where, technology can be of great help. So to sort of summarize, I would say, first of all, consider broad brushes. What does the landscape look like? You mentioned there invoicing. So governments have been working to close the gap as they perceive it, in tax collection. And with that come another set of obligations, which is to essentially transmit information back and forth in a given format, to governments in real time. So that poses difficulties. In this specific case, you don't have any other way to do it other than via technology. But again, I think the main benefit of technology can be summed up in a word, which is automation, right? Mm-hmm. Just quickly on the example of keeping updated on the tax changes in 2023, and I say 2023 because I don't have the numbers for last year yet. There were more than 90,000 changes in US sales tax legislation in 1 year. And if you bear in mind, the main driver of US sales tax calculation is product. If you compare that to whatever SKUs you have in your stock, or if you're selling perhaps digital services, non-tangible goods, that just adds and adds to the complexity. So what I would say, again, get a broad understanding of what you're getting yourself into before looking into the implementation and technology aspect or automation part of it.
No, I think when you put it like that, and there's that many thousand, and I look forward to hearing what the 2024 number is. Like you say, that's just not scalable. Absolutely not scalable. And I think the hardest thing these days is, and I'm sure everyone on this panel is old enough to have seen many technologies evolving, and from when apps and systems and frameworks have built, and like how saturated the technology market is now, like whatever vertical you're in. But you look at like those B2C companies that have got hundreds, thousands of products that they're selling. Like I used to partner with Walmart and a lot of the huge marketplaces, and it's just bonkers the amount of analysis and like you can't expect a human or a team to manually be able to look after that. And I think I know from Pleo, where we look at, obviously we analyze spend management, and we give advice on forecasting and treasury, and make sure everything's aligned internally, from making sure you've got enough funds in each bank and legal entity to be covering all of your costs. But I think it's just an absolute blows your mind on what that looks like. And I think as customers are internationally expanding, and that's why obviously we did run this session, because there's a mixture of people on this call at the moment, whether it's finance managers, CFOs at that senior level. There's a few technical project managers on here as well. So I think the automation piece is key. Vinny, do you think when they're looking at Avalara, like from obviously like the sales side, what are the biggest complexities that the customers that you have are like? What are the biggest challenges that you think they're facing as they're growing and expanding?
I noticed there's a great part of my job is to first of all educate and do precisely what I just asked customers to take into account. You're entering a new market, it's hard to really see what's coming, as you enter a new market. I think, so one thing worth mentioning is to give the example of the US again. There are different rules as to, if you have a physical presence in the US, that's one thing. You have a certain set of obligations that arise from this fact. Whereas if you are transacting, doing business, it depends on pretty much the volume of business you're doing and the destination state you are selling into. So can you repeat the question, Ashley, again, just so I'd be more specific, please?
Yeah, just really as they're looking. So if they are only in a few countries in Europe and they are looking to expand to kind of 5+ or to the US from Europe, for example, like just what the biggest complexities they see are, and how Avalara is like helping solve that.
Sure, thank you. Another complexity to bear in mind is, well, first, the whole landscape is complex in and of itself when it comes to tax, because of the size of the territory, the number of jurisdictions, all of the implications that you can't possibly foresee and manage manually. To add to that, when you're crossing borders, you have to factor in, depending on what you sell, things like cross-border taxes, you know. So how do you handle those? Where are you shipping your goods from? Where to? Across borders, right? You have to take into account mandates, you know, in countries worldwide, which are being released or coming live, if you will, in different stages. Right, so it varies from nation to nation. I would say all of these things point us to the need for a global and comprehensive solution. You know, to the extent that something like this is possible, right? Also, because of how critical this is, you don't want to end up in a situation where, without even knowing, you start to accrue historical liabilities. That's, by the way, something we help customers with, right? So customers who perhaps haven't even realized they had a problem before they had, unfortunately, a tax auditor knocking at their doors and, you know, with a big tax bill. You know, so I think trust is of the essence. You know, you want to be certain that you're speaking with an organization with this big reputation, you know, a track record of helping customers who are expanding internationally, and is able to showcase, you know, ultimately, look, how we've helped customers across 2 decades now, you know, to solve all these problems, which, by the way, is essentially the advent of SaaS technology. That's pretty much when 2 decades ago we noticed the need for, you know, software to address these needs. So trust, automate, complexity, and then you want to address that with trust, with reputation, with automation, with the ability to scale.
Could I just add on one thing on that? I think for us, almost all projects we do are international. So we do very few purely Swedish or purely Finnish projects. If it is, it's usually complex ERP need behind it. But if you only need a financial solution, there are other cheaper options that are local in each market, basically. Maybe not the US, but other than that. So almost all of our projects are international. But we're not involving Avalara in all of these, because it could be quite easy, let's say, financial setup anyway that is supported by NetSuite. When we do see the need, which is very often in the US, but also if there's a lot of companies and intercompany and so on, I totally agree with Winnie. Avalara becomes sort of the advisor in that sense as well, because if we would ask the customer, what do you need in US regarding sales tax? The answer would be, we need us to be compliant. We are talking to growth companies that are quite small. It's not enterprise companies, quite rapidly growing. For us to ask them to give us requirements on what they need, it would not be possible. For us to learn every country would not be possible either. I mean, we cannot be tax experts we're covering over 50 countries where we do implementations. So very often it's like, okay, so you're going to the US, you're going to sell cross state and cross this and this. We think you should have a meeting with these. And then there's usually a few epiphanies in those meetings where, did you know that US works like this? You're in same street, but different number, and you're getting different taxes and so on. So that's quite, and then it sounds like it's a super big thing just because it's taxes. It's not, because it's automated. I mean, it would be if you're doing it manually, but it's not. Of course, it adds some budget and adds some time to also include that in a project, but. Yeah, so I totally agree. Just wanted to say that Of course, you can check with another partner, or with Ernst & Young or something like that to check that it's correct. But I think Avalara and others are really supporting in that discussion. Sorry, Philip, go.
No, I'd love to jump in on that, because I've actually experienced this firsthand. So one of my previous companies had coming in, it was a B2C company, subscriptions, advertising, 5 or 6 different revenue streams. And I think this kind of goes back to my point about determining at what point you need to bring in those trusted partners versus doing it yourself. And I think, a lot went into this to realize 2 things, right? So at my previous firm, there were 2 areas I needed to fix. One was our contract management, and the other was our sales tax. And I think, we actually implemented Avalara, and I think a lot came through that in terms of what the team didn't know prior to me coming in terms of, where is their nexus in each state. The U.S. is very complicated. You have city, local, county type taxes, and to have a team of people managing and calculating that on invoices and then actually doing manual filing, I think that's the point where people realize we need a better system. So working with Avalara to really build out from, like you said, end to end, doing a nexus analysis, filing voluntary disclosures, and then setting a process up going forward, I think really helps. And having gone through a state of New York sales tax process audit, it's not fun, and the amount of cost that goes into past penalties and interest, adds up. And I think if you take a step back, it goes back to my ROI, conclusion that the investment in the right partners is far less than the actual long-term consequences. And that kind of goes back into why I joined Gatekeeper, is that in my previous firm, I came in to look at a pretty dysfunctional finance team. And, what I realized was there was a lot of spend that just kept reoccurring that nobody was monitoring in terms of auto renewals on dates of contracts, and just, annual increases, and then who you're doing business with. So implementing a vendor like Gatekeeper to manage all that and pull that into the ERP system, just overall ROI on that investment, just the amount of money that was spent on services that were no longer needed, just were never canceled, far exceeds what an implementation would be, and the spend on an implementation partner and a vendor.
Definitely. And Philip, I think as your experience with it, being a CFO and in that finance role, have you got any personal stories or challenges that you've grown with the business, or you've seen again horror stories or real success stories when adopting new tools and vendors?
Yeah, kind of to go back to working with a Gatekeeper or an Avalara, it really has to do working with the mindset of the management team to say, we're at a point now where we need to move to a new process. We can't keep operating in spreadsheets and in Google Sheets. It just doesn't work, and I think you're leaving a lot of money at risk, and you also are engaging a lot of human error. So I think in previous experiences, it's really figuring out what the processes are, taking that 10,000-foot view and looking at it holistically, and then realizing we can't do sales tax manually, so we need to take a look at all the different vendors out there and vet those vendors. And as Jimmy said, you're really interviewing those people as part of the process. You're bringing them in. They're going to be an arm's length away to help you do certain things. So I think that all goes into it. And then again, in terms of, it goes back to the data. One of the issues that I've had in the past with multiple companies is just the data is bifurcated in all different places. So trying to tie what contract somebody signed for deliverables and costs doesn't tie back to the invoices that we're getting. So I think pulling all that together and having that integration, I think the return on that investment is significant.
Yeah, getting it all aligned. It's interesting. So I think most people from watching this can see that not everyone, even though this is a kind of UK focused webinar, not everyone on this call is obviously from the UK. Philip being in the US, so probably used to having to deal with the joyous tax implications from your own side, as well as the business. But what happens when something like Brexit, the dirty word of Brexit, what happens when something like that comes in? And I'm going to open this to anyone who wants to answer it, because how does that affect, obviously, Jimmy from a partner side with regulations changing? Marta, you've done that multi-entity implementation and you've seen it go wrong. because of the back end configuration, and Vinny, like obviously that affects the tax side hugely. I know how much it's affected us from regulatory side at Pleo, with having different licensing laws and everything, obviously if you're lending money and working in financial services, etc. So opening that up for whoever wants to take it.
I can start, and maybe then Vinny will say against me, because I don't know, because from our end, it has, or from my experience, it hasn't been, so the Brexit hasn't been as big of a change that we thought, but that's also because, I mean, we're not the one updating so the tax nexuses and all of that in NetSuite or in Avalar, someone else is handling that, right? So as long as they are in front of it, then we have not been, I don't know of any cases that we've had, at least, that where we needed to redo a lot of work, or sure, checking that this date it needs to work with the new one, but that's usually on the customer's end to check that. So we haven't had that much, but we have those things. So I won't do the Brexit, but we have, for example, SAFT that is implemented in some countries as a local requirement. I think there's like 5 or 6 countries in Europe that has SAFT requirements. And those are quite interesting, because we've been several times that SAFT will be the 1st of Jan 2025 will be SAFT in a new country. And 2 or 3 months before that, we can still not get the actual requirements that they mean. Really, what do you mean in detail? Because it's so technical that the countries that are saying SAFT should be there, they really, it's hard for them to specify what it means. So those we've had a few times where it's a regulatory demand from 1st of this, and 2 months before we're still like wondering what the requirement will be. In SAFT, it's a bit easier because it's on demand, so it's not that you have to put in a monthly report in most countries. It's if you get the question, but we've had those quite interesting, and same with, I think we are in a good spot in e-invoicing, because e-invoicing is coming to more and more countries, and it's getting not the legal requirement, but for example, if you're going to sell in Sweden or Norway to the government or state-owned companies, they don't accept paper or PDF invoices anymore. This has been for 5 years in Sweden, if not more. But I think for us, that's not a big challenge, because the Nordics has been very, very far ahead on e-invoicing integrations to banks and so on, compared to many other countries, because we sometimes can be a bit surprised that quite large customers are doing a lot of manual work that sort of, we haven't seen here in the last 5 to 10 years. So it's been it's very depending on the region, I would say. So Vinny, where did I go wrong there with the Brexit? No. Because there was a lot of back-end work, I understand, but
I was just going to say, make no mistake, it takes us a team of 300 tax professionals to be able to be able to update the changes in legislation. And ultimately what we're trying to do for our customers is to help the customers focus on their core business, because we don't want our customers to become a tax company if their business is not tax, right? So the challenge, as Ashley asked about the challenge of the impact and challenge with things like Brexit, it's the way I see it, the challenge is change. And the challenge is not only to update your systems properly, to be able to remain compliant and address those changes in tax legislation. But the challenge also is, how do you keep track, as if it were a snapshot of changes across time, right? So if I sell your a product to you now, and I know for a fact my tax legislation is current, that's okay. What if you have to show to the tax authority, perhaps as a result of an audit, that you were compliant 5, 6 cycles of changes ago, say 2.5 years ago? Do you have track? How do you keep track of the legislation to be able to back up where you're coming from? And again, make no mistake, it's a whole company. We are an organization devoted to it, and it takes, at the very least, 300 human beings to read the legislation, interpret it, before we actually implement it into the technology. So it's no easy task by any means.
Nice. I'm just seeing if we've got any questions in the chat. So I think what would just be good to cover, I know we're wrapping up like near the end of time. I think if I just look at, we've got a couple of questions. Sorry, we've actually got quite a lot of questions. Jimmy, one for you from a partner side. How can companies ensure that finance and project managers effectively get their teams to adopt internally? How do you look at that with the end user when looking at an implementation?
The scary word of change management. This is a big part of it. And I was sort of like, when Philip discussed that most things can be done in a spreadsheet beforehand. So sometimes actually it's easier when you have a customer that hasn't had another ERP system that is now switching to NetSuite. That is actually sometimes easier than someone has built their own super mega spreadsheets beforehand, because you can do whatever you want in that, and then we're sitting trying to replicate that into NetSuite, which is really not a good idea. You need to really look at what do you need as an outcome? What do you need as an outcome for this? Which reports do you need, and so on. And if it's super hard to build exactly the report that you needed, what does it matter for your management if they're getting a report that looks like this instead? Are we covering the same KPIs? It doesn't have to look exactly the same. Of course, you want to towards historical data and so on, you want to have something that is comparable. But I think both from a financial standpoint, it's a big difference in how you work. And we often sit in demos before we sold it, and we're showing a demo from A to Z, and then someone is asking, well, how do you do this and this? Because I do that all day long. And we're like, yeah, that's automated now, because we jumped from A to D, and then from D to, you're not doing A, B, C, D, E anymore. You're doing A, F, whatever. So you're jumping quite a lot, which instead, the whole idea is, of course, that you don't want to look at every order. You don't want to look at every subscription. You want to look at the deviances or the possible mistakes and so on. So I think in general we are spending too little time on that. We're trying to do the trainings and so on, but this is absolutely an area where, well, if money wasn't an issue, we would be out much more in this area, and it's often, I wouldn't say forgotten, but it's often not enough focus on it. We also have to remember that most of our customers are running fast. I mean, our prime customer, we implemented in 5 countries, and 5 years later they're in 33 countries. So they're running quite fast for their expansion already. The good thing is they're used to adopting and changing. So it's not like you're coming into one of the Fortune 100 companies and we've always done it like this, but they also don't have really the time to reflect all the time. So we have to move fast. But one of the key things for me, though, in this is really, we always try to have in our larger projects, we always have a steer group that follows the project. My goal there is always to have a very transparent steer group, because that's the only way we can catch up these needs for additional training, for change management, and so on. We can only catch it to some degree, of course. The customer knows what's happening inside those doors, but just as they are more than welcome to say that, I don't like this consultant, or I got the wrong information, or whatever it is, I think we also have to have the partnership that in those steer groups, we can be honest and say, when we send something to Marta, we always get this fast answers and correct, and the UAT went smooth. But Vinny, for some reason, needed 25 catch-ups, so maybe we're talking to the wrong one. so that's something that you really have to be transparent about this as well. And I think that's I'm not saying change management would be to kick out Vinny in that sense. I'm sorry for using you as an example here, but yeah, but I think that really having there are people that are stuck in their matters, and we have to be able to catch that this is actually not a process problem or a system problem. This is that the person is trying to work today as he or she did in the previous system. You're not going to work the same. You're going to work in hopefully a much more efficient way, but in a different way. So,
yeah. And I know we're coming to the end of the session. So one quick question for Marta, and then we'll give a key takeaway from each person on the panel. So Marta, just a quick one. If your team, you've done all these transformation projects, if you could pack 3 tools from a tech stack, survive a year of global expansion, what would you choose?
The first one would be an ERP, and it would be NetSuite. I would do it again. I think that gives you the foundations that you need and the automation so the team can free up their time to do better tasks. The second one would be an analytics tool. So it could be Looker, Tableau, whatever you want, something that connects all the different tools you have, your tech stack, and brings all the data you need to make data-driven decisions, to have a speed. People move faster when they have this visibility. And to be honest, I'm so sorry to say that, but I have to say, because my team and my previous teams would kill me if I don't say everyone wants a spend management tool like Pleo that they can really, it's not about just submitting the expenses, but the Pleo sensation that the employees have while having this framework of expense policy, so you are unable to spend in a responsible manner, is something that all the teams have asked.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't even come down to just trust between vendors and partners, right? It's trusting your employees and how they spend as well, and having those policies in place to allow people that freedom without how they're spending, without, again, thinking of how they're using a tool. We are at an end. Sorry, I know we've run a couple of minutes over. It's been absolute pleasure talking to everybody. It's been a really, really great panel, very different experiences from each person. It would be good to know, anybody on the call, if you do want a follow-up conversation with anybody who is here. Avalara obviously cover, they're the go-to NetSuite electronic invoicing, one international solution for multiple countries, a unified platform enhancing all of that efficiency and compliance. Gatekeeper, obviously AI-driven contract lifecycle and vendor portal solution, helping businesses manage supplier relationships, making sure that they're compliant with all the government regulations and everything, and making sure you don't have to worry about those renewal dates and whatnot. Staria, one of Europe's leading NetSuite ERP consulting partners, again, so much knowledge when it comes to different implementations and being a trusted partner. And then Marta from Pleo, like I say, she's not here even from a looking and promoting Pleo side. She's here from her extensive NetSuite knowledge, and having had to grin the sweat and tears of managing these implementations. So would love to know if anybody wants to hear from anyone on here. The video will be on demand, so if there's anything that has resonated, we will send a follow-up email with the recording. If there's any questions, everybody on here, Philip from Gatekeeper, Vinny from Avalara, Marta at Pleo, myself at Pleo, and Jimmy at Staria, you can find us all on LinkedIn or our emails in that follow-up email if you have any questions. But it's been an absolute pleasure, really nice hour to spend. A lot of questions answered for what we get on a day-to-day basis. And again, it's all around driving that consultative approach and making sure it's right for you at the moment. There's no point in looking at a complex ERP system if you're not ready for it. There's no, if Google Sheets does and sees you fit, as Philip said, and then if you are using that ERP, really making sure you're ready for that next scaling step and you're using a trusted partner. before looking at making that move, because it's not a small project. So no, pleasure to have everyone. Thank you all for joining me today, and we'll send that out to you later this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.